He was tossed in a cage like trash, scarred, bleeding, and left to die. No name, no future. No one even looked at him until a 7-year-old girl walked up holding 2 coins and said, "I'll take him." It was the kind of cold that slipped beneath your clothes without asking permission, dry, sharp, and ghostly. The sky above rural Tennessee hung low, the color of wet cement. Vendors pulled their jackets tighter. Dust danced across gravel in tight little swirls, forgotten in the corners of the fairgrounds. The county fair was dying. Not just that day, not just that year. It had been dying slowly for decades, held together by nostalgia and old men too proud to admit the barns weren't full anymore. The auctioneer's voice, once sharp as a whip crack, now carried with the tired weight of habit. Chickens squawked. A pair of goats head-butted lazily behind a fence. Children tugged on sleeves, hoping for kettle corn or a pony ride, but no one looked toward the back lot, and that's where he was, tucked away behind the last row of livestock pens, almost out of sight, almost like someone wanted it that way, sat a kennel no larger than a coffin. The rust had eaten through the bottom bars, and the metal gate hung at an awkward angle, one hinge barely clinging to its socket. Inside, lying so still he could have been mistaken for dead, was a Belgian Malinois, though barely recognizable as one. His ribs were visible through thinning fur. A gash split across his muzzle, half-healed, crusted with dirt. One eye was swollen shut. Flies buzzed around his flank, landing freely without protest. His tail lay limp behind him like a snapped branch. And yet, despite the bruises, the stink, the silence, there was something eerily dignified in the way he watched the world. He wasn't scared. He wasn't hopeful either. He just waited. There were no signs posted. No one called out bids. He wasn't announced on a loudspeaker like the pigs or the prize hens. Instead, taped to the kennel's top rail, flapping gently in the wind, was a torn envelope with 4 words written in shaky black ink. No longer needed. Take him. That was it. No name, no age, no story. Just that. People walked past, some out of pity, others out of discomfort. A few gave him a second glance, maybe recognizing something faintly familiar in the slope of his ears or the hardness in his stare. But they kept moving. The fair was for buying livestock, not trouble. And this dog looked like nothing but heartbreak. A teenager with blue hair leaned over the kennel, snapped a photo, then turned to her friend and whispered, "Jesus, he looks like he's been to war." Then they left. The Malinois didn't growl, didn't whine. His eye, the one still open, followed movement, tracking it the way a predator does when it's too tired to chase. But even in exhaustion, it held something unsettling. Not wildness, not pain, just knowledge. He'd seen things. Somewhere, deep in the pit of his silence, he knew what people were. He knew they passed by when you were weak. He knew they spoke soft before the hit came. He knew that good boy could come with blood. But still, he waited. Not because he expected kindness. He'd unlearned that a long time ago. He waited because that was all he had left. By noon, the clouds had thickened. A storm was building somewhere distant, but the air hadn't moved yet. The Malinois didn't shiver. He simply blinked, slow and deliberate. His body was broken, but his spirit, that ghost that lingered behind the wounds, was still very much alive. And maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. But in that moment, no one had. Not yet. Not until she came. The wind picked up just enough to stir the dust. Somewhere a cow lowed. Somewhere else, a tired loudspeaker called for another round of bidding. But none of that reached Emery. She stood alone, just a few feet from the kennel, her boots half sunken in the muddy straw. The yellow raincoat, clearly a hand-me-down, hung past her knees like a cape, sleeves rolled twice and still swallowing her wrists. Her cheeks were flushed, not from the cold, but from something else entirely. Purpose. In her right hand she clutched 2 silver coins, dull and scratched, their engravings faded with time. They weren't just money. They were a wish, a choice, a declaration. She'd wandered from her mother only minutes earlier, following the smell of hay and the sound of shuffling hooves. She hadn't planned on stopping. But the moment she saw him, the broken dog with the soldier's eyes, she did. She didn't speak right away, just watched. Her eyes didn't dart away like the others. They stayed, studied, saw. And when she finally stepped forward, it was like something ancient stirred in the stillness. She looked up at the man tending the stall. He was middle-aged, red-cheeked, bundled in flannel and denim, chewing a toothpick like it gave him authority. Can I buy him? She asked. The man blinked down at her, then let out a short, unsure chuckle. Buy him? He echoed, smiling. Sweetheart, that dog ain't. But he stopped, because now he was looking straight into her eyes, and there was nothing childish in that stare. No whining, no pleading, just quiet conviction. Like the kind you only see in people who've already decided something, deep in their soul. Behind them, people began to slow down. Conversations faded. A few turned their heads. The man's voice softened. You got money? Emery opened her hand. 2 silver coins rested in her small palm, her entire Christmas savings. She didn't explain. She didn't beg. She just held them out. And something about the way she did it, calm, certain, almost sacred, made the world hush. Emery took one slow step forward, then another, the soles of her little boots squishing softly in the straw. Her yellow raincoat fluttered slightly in the breeze. The world around her, the fair, the crowd, the noise, faded like background static. In that moment, it was just her and the dog. She lowered herself to her knees, carefully as if not to startle a ghost. Her small hands gripped the bottom rung of the rusted kennel door. She leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. I'm not scared, she said, her breath visible in the air. You're just tired, huh? Inside, the dog didn't move, but he was watching her. One eye still swollen, the other now locked on hers, not aggressively, not warily, just watching. Seconds passed. Then slowly his head lifted. Bones cracked faintly under the strain. And then he leaned forward. Not a lunge, not a snap. He pressed his battered muzzle against the cold metal bars right where her hand waited. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't confusion. It was trust. Fragile, hesitant, but real. And everyone saw it. There was a hush that fell, soft and heavy, the kind that makes adults uncomfortable because it says too much without a single word. Behind her, Emery's mother appeared, breath short, eyes wide. Emery, she called, reaching for her daughter's shoulder. You can't just, he could bite. But Emery didn't move. She turned slightly, held up her hand, and in her open palm gleamed those 2 worn silver coins. I don't have much, she said, looking up. Her voice didn't waver. But he needs me. The crowd held its breath. A man cleared his throat but said nothing. A woman clasped her purse a little tighter. No one stepped forward. No one offered more. They all just watched. Because somewhere inside them they knew. They had walked past this dog without even slowing down. And here was this girl, small, stubborn, soaked in courage, kneeling where no one else dared. She didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She offered everything she had. And for the first time in what must have felt like eternity, the dog closed his eyes. Not from pain, but from peace. A voice broke through the silence. Wait a minute. Heads turned as a woman stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. She wore a faded blue vet coat, her long braid tucked beneath a wool cap. Her name tag was crooked, but her eyes were sharp, focused, not on Emery, but on the dog. She crouched down slowly, knees creaking, and slid her fingers through the space between the rusted bars. The dog flinched slightly but didn't pull away. Hey there, big guy, she murmured. You've seen better days, huh? Her hands moved gently, practiced. She checked his leg, his ribs, the stitched scar along his belly. Her brow furrowed. He's injured, deep muscle bruising. But these stitches, she glanced up, they're not backyard vet work. This was done under combat triage, field medicine. Emery's eyes widened. He was in a war? The vet gave a slow nod. Possibly, but there's one way to know. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small handheld scanner. The device beeped softly as she waved it over the dog's shoulder, then down his leg. Nothing. She tried again, this time lower, near the inner thigh. Beep. The soft digital chirp made the dog twitch, his ears flicking up. The vet froze. He's chipped. She tapped the screen, her voice quiet now, reverent. Military registry, encrypted. He's not just some discarded dog. He belonged to someone. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Emery whispered, almost like a secret. He still does. And the crowd realized she wasn't just offering coins. She was offering home. The vet stepped back, the scanner still glowing faintly in her hand. Her face had shifted, from concern to disbelief. She looked again at the screen, then back at the dog. His name's Ranger, she said quietly. He served with the U.S.-backed Special Forces, Combat Scout Unit. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered, "No way." But Emery didn't blink. She was already looking at him differently. Not as a stray, not even as a rescue, but as something more. 2 years ago, the vet continued, scrolling through the data, he was marked missing in action. There was an ambush overseas. His entire team thought he died. She knelt back down, her eyes misting as she met Ranger's tired gaze. "But you made it home, didn't you?" she whispered. No one knew how. There were no answers in the chip registry, no GPS log or medical report, just a note, presumed KIA, killed in action, forgotten by paperwork, lost in war. But Ranger had survived. Somehow, through jungle or desert, through wounds and miles and silence, he had made it back. Alone, and now he was here, at a rundown county fair, in a rusted cage, nearly discarded for good. Emery reached forward, placing her palm flat against the bars. Ranger leaned into it like it was the only warmth he trusted. The vet looked around, her voice firm. "He's not just any dog. He's a soldier, a hero." But Emery shook her head softly. "He's mine now," she said. Hero or not, he still needed someone. And in that moment, no one in that crowd doubted who had saved who. The story of the girl, the coins, and the wounded dog began to spread, first on local news, then on military forums, and finally across social media, shared thousands of times. Among the quiet sea of comments and condolences, one message stood out. It came from a man named Logan Reed, a former Army staff sergeant. His words were simple: "If Ranger's alive, I need to see him." Logan had served in the same Special Forces unit. 2 years ago, during a mission gone wrong, he was severely injured in a remote valley overseas. He remembered chaos, shouting, the deafening blast of an IED, and then the crushing silence. He always said it wasn't the medics who found him. It was Ranger. The dog had pulled him, bleeding, half-conscious, out of the kill zone. But after the rescue helicopter lifted off, Ranger disappeared. Logan believed he'd died that day. He had mourned him like a brother, until now. The moment Logan saw the photos of the battered Malinois lying beside the little girl in the yellow coat, he knew. "That's him," he whispered, and without waiting, he packed a bag, grabbed his cane, and started the journey. Because some debts can't be repaid with medals, some bonds aren't broken by time or silence, and some dogs are never just dogs. The wind had picked up that afternoon, tugging at loose porch screens and rustling the dry leaves that scattered across the backyard. The sky was that soft, moody gray that made everything feel still, like even time was holding its breath. Emery was on her knees in the grass, giggling softly as Ranger, now healthier, though still walking with a noticeable limp, rested beside her. His coat had filled out some. The swelling in his face had gone down, but the scars, both visible and not, remained, and yet in her presence he looked young again. She was brushing his ears with a baby-soft toothbrush she insisted helped his thinking. Ranger, ever patient, leaned into her hand, eyes half closed in peace. Then the sound of a car door closing. Emery turned. Ranger did too, but slower, his ears flicking up. A figure came around the side of the fence, one hand gripping a cane, the other curled tightly around a weathered duffel bag. Logan Reed. His gait was stiff, uneven. The steel brace on his leg caught the sunlight as he limped forward, wind pushing back the edges of his jacket. His face was calm, but his eyes, the moment they locked onto the dog, weren't calm at all. They shimmered. "Ranger?" he called, barely more than a whisper. Not a command, a question, a hope. The dog froze, then blinked, then stood. His legs trembled under the sudden weight of memory. But then, he moved. One step, another, a third, and suddenly Ranger was running, not fast, not strong, but with everything he had left. Logan dropped his cane just as the dog reached him, nearly knocking him backward. Ranger's head burrowed against his chest, tail thumping wildly, the kind of movement that comes from places deeper than joy, from reunion, from recognition, from love. The man knelt, knees groaning, arms wrapping tightly around the dog that once saved his life. Neither moved, neither spoke. There were only deep, shaky breaths and a silence heavy with history. Emery stood a few feet away, watching, her small hand clutching the hem of her raincoat. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Logan finally looked up at her, eyes wet but steady. He opened one arm and beckoned her closer. She stepped into the hug carefully, wrapping one arm around Ranger's back and the other around Logan's shoulder. "You didn't just save a dog," Logan said, his voice cracking. "You brought a soldier's best friend home." And the three of them, the girl, the warrior, and the one who had walked through fire for both, held each other like a family already written in fate. Ranger never really belonged to just one person after that. Some days, he stayed with Logan, sprawled across the worn rug of a quiet cabin tucked near the woods. They went on slow walks together, man and dog, both limping but whole. Sometimes they sat in silence for hours, Logan's hand resting gently on Ranger's back like it had never left. Healing came in those moments, not just for the body, but for the ache that had followed Logan home from war. Other days, Ranger spent time at Emery's house, curled beside her bed as she read books out loud and tied ribbons in his tail when she thought he wasn't looking. He followed her to school drop-offs, waited by the porch when she played in the yard, and sometimes, when storms rolled in, he'd press his forehead gently to her chest, like he was the one seeking comfort now. They shared him, not like property, but like people who'd been changed by the same miracle. One saved by war, one saved by kindness, and one who saved them both. A few weeks later, the town held a small ceremony under the gazebo in the park. It wasn't fancy. The folding chairs didn't match, and someone forgot to test the microphone. But the crowd came anyway. Veterans, children, farmers in work boots, teenagers who'd only seen the story online. Logan stood beside Emery, who clutched Ranger's leash like it was made of gold. When the mayor knelt and handed her the medal, a bronze disc engraved with her name and Ranger's paw print, she didn't smile big or wave to the crowd. She just looked down at Ranger. He looked up at her, and that was enough. A reporter asked later why she had chosen that dog, when there were so many healthier, prettier ones at the fair that day. Emery didn't hesitate. "Because no one else even looked at him," she said. Then she shrugged, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and maybe it was. Message of the story, expanded version. Sometimes it doesn't take a rescue team, a government program, or a miracle to change the course of a life. Sometimes all it takes is a little girl in a yellow raincoat and 2 silver coins. Because what Emery gave that day wasn't money, it was belief. Belief that something broken could still be worth loving. That scars didn't mean the story was over. She didn't see a dog that was half alive. She saw a soul that hadn't been seen in a long, long time. Her kindness didn't just save a forgotten war dog. It healed a soldier's wound no surgeon could touch. It brought a fractured community to tears. It reminded the world, loud and clear, that compassion still exists in quiet places, whispered not shouted, offered not demanded. And in that moment, when Ranger leaned into her hand and closed his eyes, we were all reminded of something powerful. Love doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need a reason. It just needs someone brave enough to look and see what others walk past. In a world too busy, too loud, too hardened, Emery stopped. She saw. And because she did, a dog came home, a soldier found peace, and an entire town remembered what humanity looks like. Sometimes, one heart really can rewrite the ending. Not just for a dog. Not just for a man, but for all of us.